Pirate kings, pirate queens, non-binary monarchs of the sea. How's it going? What's going on? The countdown continues. We're in the top 3. Running it back, so far we have covered Perona, Moria, Bonnie, and Enel. If you haven't had a chance to check those out, give them a watch. If you came from one of those, great to see you again. But if this is your first time on the channel, here's a quick primer on my process. I have gone through OnePieceTopDecks.com, SecondStorage.com, and Firefist.gg to log every single deck list that either won or topped a tournament in the Asian version of the Set 7 format, put them all into a giant spreadsheet, and assigned each list a point value based on the scale of competition of that tournament, the deck's placing in the tournament, and how far into the format that tournament took place. With that, I've been able to rank each leader as well as come up with a standard topping deck list for that leader, along with some very useful metrics on cost curve, amount of counter, number of 2K counters, non-counter characters, blockers, events, cards with a certain type even, as well as some tech choices and general popularity of cards that got used with each leader. I've also been reading a fair amount of Japanese articles from Note.com and doing some of my own testing to get further insight into these decks and why players made the choices they did, all for the purpose of getting us as ready as we can be for this set once it comes out over here. So thank you again for coming along, welcome to Sakura Kingdom, and let's get into the countdown to OP07. Number 3 is one of the newer decks on the block. He performed decently at the end of OP06 in EB01, and he gets one of the biggest boosts from Sakazuki's absence, Black Yellow Luffy. As you'll see from this list, there are not a lot of new inclusions here in the deck list, so the strategy is pretty much unchanged, but this leader is inherently powerful and we get a helpful tool in Set 7. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on the cards that I've covered in the earlier video. I'll mainly be going over any new tips or insight that I've picked up from my Set 7 testing and a lot from these Note articles I read in preparation. I'll link a couple of my favorites in the description. During the early game, we're going to start assembling our game pieces, try to find the 3 brothers cards we need. Mid-game, we organize our hand a little more and solidify a plan to get our leader effect going. Then by turn 4 or 5, we want to be at 0 life so we can start cheating out our 5-cost brothers and pumping our leader up to 9,000. For most decks, as the game goes on, our hand is going to decrease in value and our life will become more valuable, but for Black Yellow Luffy, that's very much the opposite. Our hand is our biggest resource since in the late game, 1 counter stops a 9k swing. We're putting ourselves on a bit of a timer by playing this way, so unless we absolutely need to get rid of a 7k or higher character, we just want to swing hard into our opponent's life. This deck has a linear concept since we're always looking to get to the same general setup, but how we get there when our opponent tries to impede it and then plan our turns in advance lead to a lot of different decision trees that make our approach vary according to the matchup we see and what tools we have access from the beginning of the game. Sometimes we try to hit a quick peak in power to finish our opponent off as soon as the opportunity arises, or sometimes we draw things out with continuous 5-cost spam and use that combo until we're out of cards. 3 Brothers Bond and Garp search out our many Ace, Sabo, and Luffy cards. It's very tempting to play these on turn 1 as soon as we can, but we also don't want to run into the problem of seeing an uncomboable group of brothers because we draw duplicates, so waiting and deciding based off of our draws is pretty useful whenever we can. The main reason we'd want to use Garp on turn 1 is if we think we need to get 2 swings in on turn 2. Mainly against Lucci, potentially Law, Bonnie if we want to KO one of their searchers and still hit them with our lead. There's always a chance you could see Moria on one of these, but the deck usually gets through at least half of its cards and sometimes even loops through the whole thing, so we might as well play to our outs and put him at the top of those cards we're sending to the bottom. This deck is much more of a known quantity now than it was 2 months ago, so the player base has a much better idea of how it works and how to make things more difficult. We love it if we can get to 0 life and use our leader ability solely by virtue of our opponent hitting us, but if not, our 2Ks are indispensable. Indispensable to the point that there's an argument to be made that we should mulligan for them specifically over our searchers, Sabo, or Moria. There's always a chance we can draw those combo pieces as the game goes on, but we really can't do much if we get starved out of our leader effect and don't have any way to eat through our life. As a rule of thumb, we like seeing 2 of them to be safe, but the best thing a Luffy player can do is, as soon as possible, figure out their plan and what conditions they need to be in control of their leader ability and get it going by turn 5 while not being on the edge of lethal too soon. We really don't want to delay it any further than that. Our opponent's just going to get more and more big bodies as time goes on, and that'll cut away at the value this ability gives us. Of these 2Ks, these depleters, Flampe is our priority since she only costs 1 and then nets us card advantage. And Makino is the most debated. Lists have her anywhere from 2 to 4. It can be tough because she gives us the most information when we use her early game, but using her then might give certain matchups a little more flexibility in when they can start swinging at us. If we do put her down, we have a chance to set up a brother combo, a bro combo, a comBRO, without having to use our ability. If we see a 5-cost brother corresponding to one of the 2 costs in our hand, we're best off placing it second from the bottom. It's tempting to bury them right at the bottom, but our opponent might expect that, and they often won't leave you at 1 life regardless, since you'd only need 1 more depleter in order to get to 0 life. More often, they'll attack only when they have more attacks than we do life and blockers. If this does happen and we don't defend early, then we just need to give up more and more cards to stay alive as those attacks ramp up. Otherwise, they just get to stop once we counter and they've gotten a card or 2 out of our hand. It's not as bad as it could be. We haven't lost the game yet. But when 1 card can get us out of a 9K, we really don't want to have to use them on anything smaller. But either way, it's a tough spot. We're not going to be as happy as we could be either way. But in that case, we can take 1 or 2 of those hits to give up a lower amount and survive, but still have that 5 cost we've placed on the horizon, or just 1 depleter away. If we can get to 8 or 9 Don with a mostly full hand, a 7K lead, and 1 or 2 life this way, we've avoided the worst and we have room to work. If we see a second 5 cost that corresponds with a 2 cost in hand, we can put that one right to the bottom. And as far as any 2Ks we see, those can go right to the top. As she did in this past format, Hiyori has lots of utility, but I'm going to wait to get into a maneuver or 2 with her beyond that usual raw play from hand switcheroo when I talk about Moria. I don't really have much new to say about the 2-cost brothers. I'm not sure I mentioned how helpful they are to counter with when we're in those 9K Moria loop turns. What I will say is that if we only see 1 Moria or none at all, we do not want to discard these off of Sabo, and sometimes you'll want to have 1 set up on the field the turn before you start looping the lead ability. It's very useful to save Ace for last when we can, and if we anticipate 4 cost blockers, the Luffy's going to come in handy too. Ivankov saw considerably more play in OP07, and 1 copy made it into this list. 1-ofs aren't very common in One Piece, but they basically act as a 5th Hiyori to give us another depletion option. The fact that they're a blocker also gives us more value as we move toward that lead ability, and also requires Law to use a reducer to tuck them. Moving into our 5 costs, I don't really think I gave the Star Deck Luffy the credit he deserves in that old video. We do have options to turn this leader ability on manually, but I can't stress this enough. Every card in our hand is a commodity, so doing so without losing a 2K and then drawing another card is going to be our best bet. At this point, I place him on the same priority as Sabo for our mulligan, if not higher. Against Law and Bonnie, he is our go-to turn 3 play, turn 4 versus an L so that he ensures the leader ability. I will say that if you're behind against an L, do not attack with him before you hit 0 in that matchup. Opinions are honestly pretty split on whether you play him turn 3 or turn 4 versus Black. At first, I was thinking after, that way we are a little further along in our plan. We might already have a Sabo on the board, but now I'm starting to lean toward turn 3, because unless when we reach turn 4, we already have a 5-cost Sabo that we know is on top of our life, and we bring him out with a 2-cost Sabo, he doesn't have immunity, and then Lucci just has more cards to KO with him when they're at 8 or 9. You know, a Moria Lucci Helmeppo combo easily outs him. Plus, he just has so much value as an attacker in the late game. All that being said, the answer likely depends on the plan you set based on that opening hand, and any other particulars that come up in those first couple turns. If we can safely use his ability twice, we're in a great place, And we also want to get as many out as possible in order to try and salvage the Bonnie matchup, which it sucks. I'm going to tell you right now, it sucks. But at least he hits a cost Cade without any investment. The new Egghead Luffy gives us that little bit of control we need. We could play the 5-cost Sabo from the starter deck, but he's not doing anything once we hit 0 life. But once we get low, this Luffy KOs small blockers and those harder to deal with characters like Shiraya and Bon Clay against Law, and then draws us a card. And the fact that he immediately goes to the trash actually helps us versus Law and against any other blue decks, so that we always have a target to send to life off our leader ability. We still love Black Sabo, gives us the consistency we need, and shuts down KO strategies, especially if we just keep on looping him. But discarding the wrong cards with him is debilitating. In most circumstances, we're pretty safe to discard our 5-cost characters. But if we end up needing it for a Hiyori combo, or if we don't have the 2-cost brother we need in trash for a Moria turn that we start off at 1 life, we've basically rowed our dinghy out to sea right next to a spoiled billionaire. And if our only option to avoid lethal when our opponent finally attacks us is giving up 2 cards from hand, he saves our value. Ace is great in the late game, so he's fine at 3, same with the Egghead Luffy. We're not too worried about protecting him from attacks, but if he stays on board, it's very nice to swing with him and then send him into the trash with the 2-cost Ace before we use our leader ability. And now it's combo time. Standard Moria combo is, start at 0 life, use our lead ability, revive 2 of our 2-cost brothers, transform them both, get to 9k, but some decks can break through that. And it's something we want to be considering as soon as we hit 8 Dawn. If we get to 8 and we have 1 life and 1 of the 5 costs in our trash, we can move toward our ultimate board state. So to do this, we start with Hiyori, we switch our last life out with a 5-cost character from our hand, we play the corresponding 2-cost, transform it, our leader is at 7k. That's when we use the leader effect. We then get 2 5-costs in our life. We play the 2-cost corresponding with our top life, ideally Sabo. So that way we've got 2 5-cost characters, a 9k leader, and 1 life. From there, as long as you start that 10 Dawn turn at 1 life, you play Moria, bring out the 2-cost brother that corresponds to the one on top of your life, transform that one before the effect, and then you'll have this same 9k leader plus 1 life setup. When you're selecting that bottom life, you do have to be conscious of the fact that it could end up at the bottom of your deck if your opponent does swing into it, but that extra durability could be the difference between continuing the game or losing. This next point is more so from the articles than my testing. I still want to get a few more games in with this deck, but I've been led to believe that this setup is very effective versus Law, the Mirror, Yamato, and against Blue. Another combo, if you don't see Hiyori, if you still end up at 1 life when you hit 10, is using Moria to bring out Flampe and a 2-cost brother, ideally Sabo, and that can let you get to 7k leader, 1 life left, and a blocker. This gets us ready to establish that ultimate board state I just talked about, and if that revival target is Sabo, then this is still a generally safe board state if you just hit 10. And then potentially if you put a 2-cost brother on board the turn before you hit 10, and if your 5-cost Luffy stays alive until that point, that lets you do the Hiyori combo, or you can bring back Garp and a 2-cost to then get an extra card, 5-cost Luffy to life, use your leader ability, and then you still get to 9k. In an ideal world, I would have either done a gameplay demo, or I would have been able to make some nice graphics detailing these combos. I'm very sadly behind schedule on these. I was hoping to get this out earlier today, and I still have to write another script and record one if I want to stay on pace for tomorrow, so I did have to put that by the wayside. I'm very sorry. Hopefully a time will come down the line when I'm able to have a bit more flexibility in my production, and I can add some nice visual aids in the future. But let's get into some stats. This deck is, it's so uniform just given the combo nature of it, given the way this leader ability is designed to work. Everything you see on this page is played in more than 95% of these decks. There were a couple, I think there was one deck that decided to go no Sabo, one deck that decided to go no Ace. Some were getting a little funky with these ace ratios. That's actually a point that's going to come up when we get to the cuts and additions. But there were some more under the radar picks. Ivankov made it into this list. A couple even played them at 2. One was at 3. And Black Yellow Luffy's biggest weakness, outside of the fact that it's on a timer when it comes to countering from hand, is the fact that it doesn't have a way to deal with characters of 5 cost or above. At least when it comes to this very standardized build. A couple players did focus on workarounds. 3 lists ran the yellow Sabo. I don't think he's a bad card if you're putting him in addition to the other brothers that we run. It's hard to find the space. That's my only thing. 10 cost Kuzan does get rid of those 5 cost characters immediately, which can be a huge boon, against Law, in the mirror, to get rid of that Cavendish in Bonnie. And he then puts that 9 cost Zoro, which is the bane of our existence, in range of the Egghead Luffy, also called Rocket Luffy. I found another nickname for this card. 4 cost Kuzan, Ice Age, Thunderbolt, all fill that same role, just at different timings. If I'm being completely honest, I have not tried these cards myself. The articles on Note didn't even really touch on them that much, so if you've used these yourself and you have had any luck with them, I am all ears, and I'm very interested in trying them, if, you can find the space. Oh, right, that's the slide we're on right now. So I'll start with the additions. Some people played up to 3 Ivankov. One thing I forgot to mention about them is that we could bring the Ivankov off with Moria and then just make our leader 7k since so many of their characters are just 5ks. Some opt to bring Makino or Ace up to 4 as well. Those spots are extremely flexible. And then we start getting into those other control options. When we get to the cuts, though, it's a little wonky, I guess, just because, there's only so much room we have. The Ivankov and the 3rd Makino, very easily cuttable. From there is a big drop-off as far as, deviance from the norm. The first tier of that deviance would be reducing the 2 cost Ace to 1 and the 5 cost to 2. You'll see I've got more than 10 cards listed here. It's at 14. It's because when we get to that second tier of degeneracy, really, tier 2.5 if we're getting into the crazy nitty-gritty of tier lists. But the 4 Sabo, the 2 5-cost Ace, and that last 2-cost Ace all scored exactly the same, just because of the way this is going. And, those are some deeper cuts to be making, so there's just as much pause to be given there. But if you really want to tech this out, take it in a different direction, these are the ways that other players have made that work. And there is Black Yellow Luffy. I love this deck. I think that I personally am going to need a little more testing to feel as confident as I do with my 2 current top picks. But it's very strong, especially if you're not going to see a lot of Bonnie. If you vibe with this sort of deck, if you enjoy being trolly, cheating characters out, long-term planning, then pick it up, play some games. This is Sakura Kingdom. I'm gonna see how much a 12-pack of Bang is and what the lethal dose of caffeine is to make sure that I don't, Oh, no, I'll get through. I won't run out of cards in hand. I can stay at 9k. Nah, I'm too hyped about number 2 and number 1 to let those go by the wayside. I will see you real soon.